fact, over 20 years ago, I had a handgun stolen out of my car while I was at work. So it occurred in broad daylight, stole a gun out of the car, and of course it was missing for about 6 years. 6 years after it was stolen, got a call from a lieutenant at the police department, and he said, "Hey, are you still missing this gun?"
We are the Armed Attorneys today. We're back with a very fun Your Questions Answered episode. We're going to be talking about Trump's executive order, a bill that's kind of picking up steam in Colorado that seeks to ban virtually all firearms with detachable magazines. And finally, how can you know if a gun you're purchasing is stolen? Is there a way to do that? But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is sponsored by Aura. Have you ever received a pop-up notification to update your phone and hit the ignore button? Yeah, that might not have been a good idea. One reason we all receive so many spam calls and texts is that data breaches are happening more and more often. In fact, just recently, Apple is warning millions of its customers to update their iPhones right now after security breaches allowed hackers to take control of devices. Apple's explanation of the vulnerability means hackers could get full admin access to the device, which could allow intruders to impersonate the device owner and subsequently run any software in their name. We know better than most about taking safety and security into our own hands, and that's why you should be proactive with Aura, the sponsor of today's video.
Aura has almost every internet safety tool you'll ever need, all inside one app. Aura features a VPN, password manager, real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, and protection for devices from malware. These tools are crucial if you want to protect your bank account and social media accounts and other sensitive information. In addition to data breach notifications, Aura will help remove your personal information from data brokers and people search sites that can sell it to identity thieves and scammers.
Aura is always on, provides incredible peace of mind, and with its 24/7 US-based support, it does all the hard work of keeping you safe online. Stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches and take control of your privacy with Aura. Go to our sponsor, aura.com/armedattorneys to get a 14-day free trial and see if any of your data has been exposed. Edwin Walker, thank you for joining us for questions.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think I'll do the first one to you. So this comes from Batco10. How does President Trump's executive order that he signed on February the 7th, 2025, protect the Second Amendment, affect the rule? And the rule that he was referencing in the video that they were talking about was this change to what constitutes engaging in the business.
Well, sure, and it was written fairly broadly to look at all. Now, keep in mind, an executive order only directs the executive branch to engage in certain actions. So, if we can remember some of the Biden executive orders that ordered, the ATF to have the zero tolerance policy and to go through and find ways to restrict guns. This does the exact opposite. It orders a review of all of those actions taken by either the Biden Justice Department, the ATF, or any other agency that's affected by that, and says, look at these things that they did, that they said, that they put into the federal regulations, and see if they violate the Second Amendment. And yes, one of the more egregious ones was basically really, really expanding the definition of who can do business. We also, of course, have the force reset triggers,
pistol
braces,
willful violations for FFL. So this is a target-rich environment where the ATF kind of went off the rails, really pushed things to their absolute extreme limits to say, hey, look, the Congress said we can do this, but really they completely deviated. If we're going to go off of what the Congress said, we would just have the United States Code copied and pasted in the Code of Federal Regulation. Well, they didn't do that. So I'm very, very hopeful.
And keep in mind, the main law that they're going to be reviewing is that whole bipartisan, safer communities, blah, blah, blah. And so that's where a lot of this language comes from. And so it'll be very interesting. However, there are many in the gun community concerned that it's Pam Bondi that will be doing the reviewing.
I just thought of another one, that Extreme Risk Protection Order Office, that was established by executive order.
Sure.
So, I mean, that one's probably going to be up on the chopping block. But all right, I got somebody to blame for this one, the Heritage Foundation. There were no Second Amendment policies in Project 2025. Trump didn't know what to do when he got into office on day one.
I know.
That's terrible.
It's a shame.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Heritage Foundation. The next question that we have was sent in by Carl H. Karacher. God dang it. Why'd you give me the hard one? Carl
Just call him Carl. All right,
Carl
Carl,
H.
we got you.
Karacha, 5628, in which he says, regarding prosecutions years later, could a pro self-defense DA, yeah, like those exist, bring charges with the intention of losing the case to prevent a malicious prosecution years later? I know it's unlikely, but is this technically possible? Is there an accepted way for a DA to actually legally throw the case?
So, yes, and we actually have kind of some experience with this, not maybe the way you would expect it happened in Galveston County, but really what we're trying to protections we're trying to invoke is, hey, double jeopardy. You've already tried me for this crime, you can't try me again for it. So that's kind of the legal shield we want to hide behind. When does double, this jeopardy attach? Well, it's after jury selection. And so this actually happened down here where a DA, being very cocky, thinking that they could force a defendant to plead for a defense attorney to tell his guy to sign up for some kind of plea bargain, was kind of playing chicken, announced ready for trial, picked a jury, went all the way through jury selection, and when the court said, all right, state, call your first witness, none of their witnesses were subpoenaed or ready to testify, and they had to rest their case. And so right there, they haven't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They haven't presented any evidence, and the court poured them out. It's called a
Directed verdict.
yeah, directed verdict. Sorry, I had something in my throat. But directed verdict, it's like, hey, you have to have some evidence of each of these elements in order for a rational jury to even potentially find that you proved your case beyond a reasonable doubt. No rational jury could reach that, so the court dismissed the case. So, yeah, I guess if you're a really cool DA, you could try to figure that out. I imagine there would be repercussions with the taxpayers for wasting all of their time, dragging them in, and paneling a jury, and then basically giving up.
Well, what about this idea that a prosecutor could say, look, I know your guy acted in self-defense, but I've got to go forward with this case. Usually here in where we practice, that's usually done at the grand jury level, not
Yeah.
the trial level.
Yeah, but even there, and that's what Emily and I were talking about in the last video, how if they, and this is the standard in Texas, and every jurisdiction could be a little bit different, unless there's material new evidence. If there's material new evidence, then they could represent the case to a grand jury. The tragic case we had something like that happen in Houston where they had an FBI guy watch a video and say, aha, I can mind read people and I know what was in his mind. That's the material new evidence, so we're going to charge him. So the threshold, what does material new evidence mean? A different guy with special training watching a video? Well, you see how this thing could be not as much protection as you think it is, so you got to be careful. All right, next question. This is by TMSTUTZ921. Cash only, no papers question. Emily's mug. It's because we don't have Emily today. How can someone check to confirm that there's nothing stolen before buying it?
Well, there's not really. And so in a case like this, as they say, you pays your money, you takes your chances.
Yeah, so this is, if you tried to, call into a police station, ask them to run a gun through the lost and stolen property database, they're not going to do it for you. They have, whenever these police departments access this data, they have to kind of agree that it's for a legitimate law enforcement purpose. I could see some folks getting in trouble for just running guns when they're not supposed to. So they probably won't do that for you. I wouldn't even attempt to try to put them in that position. But really, I would just fall back on, if it seems too good to be true, or, check your spidey senses, you're buying a gun in an alley for a guy for 1/20th of the price.
Sure. But even at a pawn shop, I mean, I would like to have the opportunity to relay a personal story.
Yeah.
Many years ago, in fact, over 20 years ago, I had a handgun stolen out of my car while I was at work. So it occurred in broad daylight, stole a gun out of the car. And of course, it was missing for about 6 years. 6 years after it was stolen, got a call from a lieutenant at the police department. And he said, hey, are you still missing this gun? And I said, of course I'm missing this gun. Oh, one thing that this particular police department did, which was very interesting, was every single year around the anniversary of me having the gun stolen, they would actually send me a form and say, we're just finding out if you ever recovered this gun in any way, and if so, if you have not, then we will keep it on the lost and stolen gun database. And so sure enough, about 6 years later, they found it at a pawn shop. They were doing a random sweep at the pawn shop, was where they go in, they run all the serial numbers to find out if they're stolen. probably a seedy type of pawn shop, found my gun that was stolen, and I got everything back. The pawn shop had no argument, because one thing that we learn in contract law is that a thief can never transfer good title. And so, since a thief cannot transfer good title, that pawn shop had bad title to my gun. I have an absolute right to recover it, which I did, which included they had upgraded the grips on the gun. They had bought 2 or 3 new magazines for the gun. They had bought a case for the gun. And so I got like $200 worth of extra stuff just for having my gun missing for 6 years.
That's interest. That's interest on the gun that you
Interest
acquired.
on the gun.
Is your local pawn shop the Steals and Deals with the raccoon with the money bag like it just robbed a bank?
No, it wasn't that pawn shop.
All right.
But it just goes to show that yes, if somebody would have come in and bought that gun from the pawn shop, got stopped, and then somehow the police search their car, they're gonna always run the serial number to search see if it's stolen. That person would have been immediately dispossessed of my gun, and I would have gotten it back.
And from the perspective, let's say you've bought a gun and you're like, I don't know that it's possible this thing could be stolen. What I would say is the standard for you is you either know that it's stolen or you have reason to believe that it's stolen. So if you know it's stolen, someone's like, hey, I got the stolen gun. Obviously, you're on notice. When might you else be on notice? Well, if it's way too good of a deal to be true, if you're not buying it through traditional means and the government can prove all these things, that's when, all right, maybe you're on notice that this thing is stolen. So just be careful. If you bought it at fair market value, then it's probably not going to be a huge issue. There's no reason for you to believe that the gun is stolen. All right. This one, I'll kick this one off to you since I finished. This is Shoney1. Shoney's.
Shoney1.
Hey, armed attorneys. If you're still there, have you changed your minds on the idea of having a trust for non-NFA items given the expansion of red flag laws? And how would a red flag confiscation occur or be affected with firearms owned in a trust? It's a good question.
Sure. And a lot of people, I know that there's a lot of attorneys out there pushing trusts, and, of course they want to write you trust for anything they can. But whenever it comes to red flag laws, we're talking about possession. We're not talking about ownership. Ownership of the firearm is irrelevant whenever it comes to whether or not somebody can have a gun confiscated from them, because it's you look at the guns that they have in their possession. And so no police officer is going to be stopped by somebody, when they're executing a red flag warrant, which hopefully, that'll never come here. But when they're executing a red flag warrant, they go, hey, give me that gun. And the guy goes, I don't own that gun. So-and-so trust owns that gun. They're not going to say, okay, well, that means we can't touch it. So ownership, not relevant to a red flag search.
And all right. And I'm going to take the most wild hypothetical or take it to its logical extreme. Items held in a non-NFA gun trust, not in the physical presence of the person. Maybe it's held in a storage unit, right? Or is that person still in possession of the firearms? Yeah, probably. Most states are going to say that possession is care, custody, control, and management. Just like your car parked in your driveway, you're not in your car right there, but if there's a kilo of cocaine in it, you're going to get charged with the kilo of cocaine. And so, does that add any kind of legal protection to it? I don't think so. I mean, when people call into our office saying, hey, I want to create a non-NFA gun trust, we tell them to save their money.
Sure. And the thing about it is that if you were to make the argument that I don't own those guns, the trust owns the guns, the court's going to look at who is the trustee, who is the person who has access to possess those guns. And if you aren't the trustee, then who knows, maybe you do have a good argument. But if you're one of the trustees or co-trustee, you have access, maybe a court will make some sort of special dispensation and order that you either be removed as a trustee from that, or that the guns go into the possession of one of the other trustees if there is more than one, and that that trustee then is ordered to never let you have access. So
yeah, I can see a court say submit an affidavit swearing that you've amended the trust and have been removed as a co-trustee. I could see that totally happening.
Well, the next one is from Joel Haslow, and he says, why have you guys not addressed the insane bill being introduced in Colorado looking to ban any weapon that takes a magazine? This is being talked about elsewhere. This needs serious attention by everyone who has a platform to do so. I am surprised you have not talked about this already, unless I missed it.
No, we have not talked about it yet. And so I think it is worth discussing. And I'll just kind of give out our general rule. We try not to talk about stuff that is super speculative. Like there's, just to give you an example, I've read over 150 bills filed in the Texas legislature this session. I will tell you, of those, maybe 4 or 5 have like anti-gun legislation, maybe have legs on it. It might be a little bit higher than that. Maybe it's closer to a dozen. So it's like I'm not going to ring the alarm bell every time an anti-gun leftist files a bill that doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of passing. Now this one is a little bit different because this one does have a snowball's chance in hell of passing. In fact, it just recently passed out of its committee. And if you want to check this out, this is in the Colorado. It's Senate Bill 25-3. And effectively what this bill does, as opposed to necessarily focusing on the accoutrements of a firearm that make it look scary, it would say, hey, guess what? Your traditional AR style rifles, if it has a detachable magazine, it effectively bans those rifles.
Yeah, and it looks at the mechanism because there's been a lot of concern that it would affect all of your semi-automatic handguns, because it talks about the method in which the gun resets itself, the way that it blows back the block or the slide, and how it interjects the new round. And so it does get fairly technical in looking at which if it's a gas operated system, then it's going to be covered. If it's just simply a system that relies on recoil, it's not going to be covered. But I mean, this is some really hyper technical stuff. And it will be interesting. It went to committee, got amended 5 times. So
yeah, all those amendments didn't really do anything.
Yeah, they were special. Like it said cops could still possess these, film companies could still possess these.
If it shot blanks.
Yeah,
like the tube underneath the firearm doesn't count as the magazine. So this is going to be heard. So this video is coming out on Monday, Friday previous. That's when this thing is gonna be debated. So maybe it's even passed out of the Senate at this point. I know the governor has been kind of on the fence, saying, hey, guess what? This thing has some major concerns about, hey, is this going to affect firearms that folks already own? And he's kind of indicated that he's not going to sign it if it's going to affect people who already have these items. And so maybe it gets amended further by the time this goes out. But Senate Bill 25-3 in Colorado, you need to go let your lawmakers know this is not an acceptable gun grab.
Yeah, that brings up the issue. Colorado, what the heck happened to y'all? I mean, you were part of the West. You were part of the bastion of individual liberty, of freedom. I mean, have you been Californiaized that much? And the one thing I can say is what has happened in Colorado absolutely 100% needs to put every Texan on notice that could possibly happen here.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we saw in Georgia, too, bringing in the Hollywood. They want to try to bring Hollywood into Texas. I get it. That's fine. Don't subsidize it. Let those people figure it out on their own. So we got that.
I put a tax on puffy direct-to-pants.
But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And as you see, this is becoming a regular segment. If you have a question, leave it in the section down below, and we hope to see it on the next episode. Until then, we are the Armed Attorneys.